Good morning to you for teleSUR. I'm Regan Devines in Caracas, Venezuela. Thank you so much for being here with us on From the South. As a new round of Colombian peace talks go into their second day in Havana, Bogota's Senate has voted to prevent leaders of the FARC guerrillas from holding elected office once a final agreement is reached. In spite of the progress made in the negotiations between the FARC as well as social movements have warned of serious risks to the rebels' unilateral ceasefire. This as a result of harassment by the Colombian armed forces, along with increased activity by right-wing paramilitaries.
We want this commission that is preparing the way to a bilateral ceasefire to seek agreement between the commanders of the army and the commanders of the FARC to ensure an end to the kind of actions that we have been denouncing.
As my colleague Angela Robledo has pointed out, the situation is even worse for the civilian population with these roadblocks, constant searches, and the presence of paramilitaries who come in behind the armed forces.
An impeachment case against the head of the Brazilian lower house for corruption is about to get underway in Brasilia. On Tuesday, the Ethics Council of the Brazilian Congress appointed a rapporteur to evaluate the accusations against Eduardo Cunha, who has been leading efforts to impeach President Dilma Rousseff. The Attorney General has accused Cunha of receiving money from the state-controlled oil company Petrobras in the corruption scandal known as Lava Jato. And today marks the 10th anniversary of Latin America's rejection of the Free Trade Area of the Americas, also known as ALCA. The proposal put forward by former U.S. President George Bush sought to create a free trade area for all of the American continent, regardless of the unequal terms in which competition would take place between nations. During the Americas Summit at Mar del Plata in Argentina in 2005, social movements and progressive governments led by Venezuela's Hugo Chavez defeated the agreement in a landmark in Latin American history.
Al ALCA, repito, la derrotamos los pueblos de este continente. Y al ALCA hoy le tocó su entierro aquí en Mar del Plata. Hoy enterramos al ALCA.
The debate on how Argentina's next government will handle the country's legal dispute with the vulture funds having taken center stage as the campaign gears up for the November 22nd presidential runoff between the Front for Victory's Daniel Scioli and right-wing candidate Mauricio Macri. Here is teleSUR's correspondent Leo Poblete Coduti with more from Buenos Aires.
Argentina must pay what it owes. This is what senior financial advisors of the right-wing pro-party have been repeatedly saying in the lead-up to the November 22 presidential runoff, even if it means bankrupting the country and sending millions of Argentines back into poverty.
The pro-party is saying, let's give the vulture funds the $2 billion they are after, and then another $13 billion to all those other creditors who are lining up to be paid under the same conditions. Do you know what $15 billion means to Argentina today? It is more than half of the country's reserves.
If the right-wing candidate Mauricio Macri wins the runoff, it is likely he will accept Judge Tomás Gries's decision to pay the vulture funds and other creditors the staggering sum of $15 billion immediately and in cash. The question is, how exactly would this affect Argentina's finances?
To pay all of that debt in line with Gries's ruling would cause all sorts of problems. Above all, it would put in doubt the country's development, and again we would be burdened with a debt that we and our children would certainly have to pay. What's worse, this is a fictitious debt invented by the judge.
Mauricio Macri has expressed disgust at what he calls a horrific campaign of fear and lies from the Front for Victory camp. He says they want to scare people into believing he will imitate the neoliberal economic policy begun by the military dictatorship. The government says it is Macri and his team that are scaring off the population.
What are they scared of? They're the ones saying this. None of you can deny that you have heard what Macri's financial advisors, such as Carlos Melconian, Jose Esper, or Miguel Broda have said. They have been saying it every day, everywhere, whenever they get the chance.
In May, the vulture funds announced they would accept government bonds to resolve their conflict with Argentina. But by agreeing to Judge Gries's ruling and paying out $15 billion in cash, Argentina's right wing would not just be making a gift to vulture fund creditors. It would also be a nod towards a return to the financial dependence on international bodies such as the IMF that crippled this country's sovereignty towards the turn of the millennium. According to heterodox economists, such a hefty and sudden blow to the country's currency reserves could automatically force the need for a multi-billion-dollar bailout package from the IMF, in exchange of the same austerity measures that organisation always hands down to whoever knocks on the door asking for a loan. Leo Politico Uti, TeleSUR, Buenos Aires.
The Romanian Prime Minister Victor Ponta has resigned after mounting pressure and protest action. His resignation comes after around 20,000 people gathered in Bucharest demanding that Ponta step down. Outrage has mounted over a fire killed 32 people in a nightclub earlier this week. Protesters blamed the government for corrupt practices that allowed the nightclub to function despite not meeting basic safety requirements. A historic meeting is set to take place this week between the leaders of China and Taiwan. The meeting in Singapore on Saturday will be the first in over 60 years of strained relations. No formal agreement is expected to be signed, but the Chinese Foreign Ministry has said that the encounter will have historic significance.
I believe that the peaceful development of cross-straits relations across the Taiwan Strait fits the interests of both sides and also fits the interests of the whole region and the world.
A new law approved by the United States Senate brings back to the fore the debate between cybersecurity and privacy for citizens. Our correspondent in Washington, Bianca Perez, has more. She filed this report.
Citizens in the United States constantly make use of their electronic devices, making themselves and their personal information vulnerable to hacking. A new law passed by the Senate seeks to protect citizens from these cyber threats. However, experts feel that there is no way to truly regulate these attacks.
The internet doesn't have laws. The internet is a space in which you share your information. I share my information and there are no regulations. Since there is no regulation and the internet is so big, there are web pages being created even as we speak. The government is unable to stay on top of all these sites.
Recent cyber attacks like the hacking of CIA Director John Brennan and the Office of Personnel Management, as well as the hacking of major corporations like Target, have left millions of U.S. citizens feeling highly at risk. Though this bill is meant to enhance security for citizens, experts feel that it actually makes citizens more vulnerable.
The government has proved itself not to be so great about protecting its own data. So the logic of the Congress in passing this law was if the government has information about cybersecurity threats, they can stop the cybersecurity threats. But the problem is what they're doing is setting up a situation where even more of our data is exploitable.
The continued gathering of personal information by governmental agencies has been highly criticized by citizens and activists who oppose this measure. This bill allows large corporations to share personal information with government agencies without the knowledge of citizens affected.
The government's answer always seems to be, well, let's gather more information about innocent Americans. The more information we have, the better we can do. But what we've seen, especially in the 9/11 attack, is that the government has the information. They're just not sharing it and they're not analyzing it right.
The Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act passed in the Senate and will be brought before the House of Representatives for its final approval. Bianca Perez, TeleSUR, Washington, D.C.
On Sunday, Haitians congregated at Port-au-Prince's National Cemetery to spend time with their deceased loved ones and to remember them during the Day of the Dead celebrations. The faithful mark All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day with voodoo worship and by offering coffee and fruit to deceased loved ones. Although celebrated across Latin America and the Caribbean, Haitians have given their own Day of the Dead celebrations a voodoo twist. Voodoo practitioners honor their ancestors with ceremonies often accompanied with bones, rum, and a black cross. Over in El Salvador on Sunday, young revelers took part in a parade called La Calayusa. Painted carts carrying torches and mythological characters paraded through the city located just 25 kilometers north of San Salvador. The indigenous tradition precedes the arrival of the Spanish to the Americas. Only recently, though, has the festival regained its prominence as the country's most popular way to celebrate the Day of the Dead. And remember, you can join us on Twitter and on Facebook, and you can follow up on these and other stories on our website, telesurtv.net/English. For Telesur English, I'm Regan Veens. Have a safe and productive morning. We hope you can join us on our newscast just after midday later on today.